Back in the day, cars had soul, but not every car was welcome on American roads. Some were too foreign, some too strange, and others were simply ahead of their time. From the forgotten Czech Tatra to Japan's tiniest Subaru, these rare machines tell a story of politics, innovation, and rejection. This is a journey into the cars America didn't accept, but maybe should have.
The Renault 4CV is a rear-engined, rear-wheel drive economy car produced by French manufacturer Renault from 1947 to 1961 with over 1.1 million units built. It was Renault's first mass-market model post-World War II, meeting France's urgent need for affordable, reliable transportation. Compact at around 3.6 meters long, it features a simple 3-speed manual gearbox and a small 747 to 760 cc 4-cylinder engine designed to be efficient and easy to repair. US won't see it legal on American roads. Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, FMVSS, compliance. The US has had strict safety regulations, FMVSS, covering crashworthiness, bumpers, seatbelts, airbags, etc., since the late 1960s. The Renault 4CV, built in the late 1940s and 50s, does not comply with most of these standards. No modern seatbelts, crash-required bumpers, airbags, or crash structures. The U.S. law required cars from 1973 model year to survive 5-mile-per-hour impacts to protect things like lights and engine. The 4CV has a minimal bumper by modern standards and would fail such tests. U.S. federal import rules allow classic cars over 25 years old to be imported if they meet FMVSS or exempt them if imported for shows or similar non-regular use. The Renault 4CV cannot be legally registered or driven in the U.S. as a street car because it was never built to modern safety or structural standards required after 1967. It fails mandatory 5-mile-per-hour bumper protection. It is not technically permissible under FMVSS. And import rules don't support regular road use, only special exemptions for museum or show purposes.
The Volga GAZ-21 was built by Gorky Automobile Plant in the Soviet Union from 1956 to 1970, totaling about 639,000 cars produced. Styled to echo American cars like the Chevy Bel Air or Ford Mainline, it incorporated features that were advanced for its time in the USSR: reclining seats, a radio, heater, windshield washer, and generous ground clearance. Under the hood, a 2.5-liter inline-4 engine producing around 70 to 75 horsepower with roughly 123 pound-feet of torque made it to a 3-speed manual. Some early autos existed, robust enough for taxis, government cars, and status symbols. Why it's not legal in the US? Non-compliance with FMVSS requirements. The Volga was built decades before the U.S. implemented the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, FMVSS, starting in the late 1960s. It lacks required features like modern crash structures, seat belts, impact-resistant bumpers, airbags, and emissions controls. Expensive modifications are prohibitively difficult. Importing a non-compliant vehicle often requires full destructive crash testing and modifications by a registered importer. The cost and feasibility are typically beyond reach, even for wealthier collectors. Classic car exemptions don't fully apply. U.S. law allows importing vehicles over 25 years old under the show or display exemption, but this is limited to models of significant historical or technological value. The Volga GAZ-21 is rarely accepted, and if it is, use on public roads may be capped at often 2,500 miles per year, and generally for display purposes only. The Volga GAZ-21 cannot be legally registered or regularly driven in the U.S. because it was never built to meet FMVSS crash safety, emissions, or bumper standards. While cars over 25 years old can sometimes enter under exemptions, the Volga typically fails to qualify except under rare show or display approvals, which severely restrict road use.
What is the Lada 2101?
The Vaz 2101, known internationally as the Lada 2101, was a Soviet-built four-door compact sedan produced from 1970 to 1982, continuing in limited form to 1983 by Avtovaz in Tolyatti, USSR. It was built from a license of the Fiat 124, but modified with over 800 changes to suit Soviet road conditions. Thicker steel body, raised suspension, rear drum brakes, and simplified engine and fuel systems. Early engines included a 1.2-liter inline-4 producing 62 horsepower, later upgraded to a 1.3-liter 70 horsepower for export markets. Performance was modest with top speeds around 87 miles per hour and 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in 20 to 23 seconds. US, why it's illegal to drive in the US. 1. No FMVSS safety compliance. The Lada 2101 predates U.S. Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, FMVSS, which were introduced beginning in 1967 with seatbelts and significantly expanded into the 1970s, covering crash structures, bumpers, airbags, lighting, and emissions. The 2101 lacks nearly all these mandated systems and crash safety features. 2. Not officially imported to the U.S. While the Lada 2101 was exported to many Western countries beginning in the mid-1970s, no units were officially sold in the United States or Canada. U.S. Ladas that exist are private gray market imports, rare and difficult to legalize. 3. Import and emission barriers. Importing a non-compliant vehicle into the U.S. requires costly modifications or crash testing through a registered importer. Even then, compliance with U.S. emission standards, example California CARB, is extremely difficult. For example, owners have reported needing $7,500 lab testing just for emissions compliance in California. 4. Classic car exemptions are limited. Although U.S. law allows show and display exemptions for vehicles over 25 years old, the 2101 is not typically granted such status due to limited historical significance in U.S. automotive context. Even if granted, usage on public roads is severely restricted, often capped at a few thousand miles per year and primarily for display at shows. The Lada 2101 cannot be legally registered or driven in the U.S. because it lacks compliance with critical U.S. safety and emission standards. It was never officially imported or sold in North America. Gray market imports require prohibitively expensive modifications. Exemptions for classic cars are typically unavailable or too restrictive.
What is the Skoda 1000 MB? The Skoda 1000 MB was a small family car produced in Mlada Boleslav, Czechoslovakia between 1964 and 1969. With over 443,000 units built, including sedans and coupe versions, MBX. It was Skoda's first rear-engined, rear-wheel drive model featuring a 988cc OHV water-cooled inline-4, producing initially 37 HP, upgraded to around 43 HP in later versions with a claimed top speed around 120 kilometers per hour or 75 miles per hour. It was lightweight, approximately 755 kilograms, used unibody construction, independent suspension, and carried design simplicity, affordable yet practical for its era. Why it's not legal to drive in the US? 1. Lack of FMVSS compliance. The Skoda 1000 MB predates U.S. Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, FMVSS, introduced in the late 1960s and expanded in the 1970s, covering crashworthiness, safety structures, seat belts, bumpers, lighting, and emissions controls. It lacks mandatory safety equipment such as modern seat belts, energy-absorbing bumpers, structural crash protection, airbags, and U.S.-compliant lighting and emission systems. 2. No official export or U.S. market presence. While exported widely to Europe, Australia, and New Zealand, the Skoda 1000 MB was not officially imported to the U.S. in any significant numbers, making it virtually unknown and unsupported in North America. 3. Import compliance barriers. Gray market import of a non-FMVSS vehicle into the U.S. requires major modifications or destructive crash testing via a registered importer. This is typically impractical and prohibitively expensive. 4. Classic car exceptions are limited. U.S. law allows import of vehicles older than 25 years under the show or display exemption, but only for rare historical or technologically significant cars. The Škoda 1000 MB generally does not qualify and cannot be legally registered for regular driving under this rule. The Škoda 1000 MB cannot be legally registered or driven in the U.S. because it was never built to meet FMVSS safety or emission standards. It was never officially sold or imported into the U.S. Gray market import and modification are legally and financially prohibitive. Classic car exemptions rarely apply or permit regular road use.
What is the Wartburg 353? The Wartburg 353, often called Wartburg Knight in export markets, was built by VEB Automobile Work Eisenach in East Germany from 1966 to 1988 with over 1.2 million units produced. It came in sedan, estate, tourist, and pickup trans versions. Powered by a 993cc three-cylinder two-stroke engine, it initially produced about 45 horsepower, later rising to around 50 to 55 horsepower, with top speeds from 120 to 160 kilometers per hour, depending on the model. Features included front-wheel drive, a freewheel gearbox, no engine braking unless manually disabled, independent suspension, and a lightweight steel body, known for simplicity and durability, but also loud and underpowered compared to Western contemporaries. USA. Why it can't be legally driven in the US. 1. Fails US FMVSS safety regulations. The Wartburg 353 predates adoption of Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, FMVSS, introduced in the late 1960s, covering crashworthiness, seatbelts, bumpers, lighting, and emissions. The car lacks modern crash structures, energy-absorbing bumpers, airbags, US-compliant lighting, and emission systems, making it non-compliant under DOT and EPA rules. 2. No official US import or certification. It was never sold or certified for the US market, unlike many Western European exports. Therefore, no version meets US crash test or emission standards. Any private import would require full modification and crash testing, a prohibitively costly and near impossible process for most people. 3. Gray market ban and limited exceptions. Prior to 1988, some foreign vehicles could enter the US via the gray market, if modified to comply. But the 1988 Imported Vehicle Safety Compliance Act effectively ended imports of non-US vehicles, except under narrow exceptions. These include vehicles over 25 years old, which may be exempt from FMVSS and emissions rules, but only if they qualify under collector exemptions and state rules. Show or display exemption for historically or technically significant vehicles produced in very low numbers, less than 500, which allows limited street use, often capped at 2,500 miles per year. The Wartburg 353 does not generally qualify for these exemptions. It wasn't rare or historically recognized enough, so cannot be legally titrated or driven even if over 25 years old. The Wartburg 353 cannot be legally registered or driven on American roads because it lacks conformity with critical FMVSS safety and emission standards, including crash tests, seat belts, bumpers, and lighting. It was never officially sold in the US or homologated to US regulations. Private imports require extensive certification by a registered importer, which is prohibitively expensive and rarely feasible. It almost never qualifies for the show or display or 25-year exemptions.